Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. How are you doing today? I hope that you are well and that this video finds you in good spirits during these times. And once again, as I mention these times, I would like to emphasize that it is most important that you all take very good care of yourselves and stay well, stay healthy, and stay safe and stay strong as you always do and as you continue to do, my friends. Please take very good care of yourselves during this time. And I would like to once again thank you very much for always giving me your input and responses to the various questions that I have posed to you over the course of the last few weeks or so. And so I'm very encouraged and happy to see those responses. As I say, I'll try to make a video later, maybe sometime in the next few days, just to mention a number of responses that I would like to highlight that I think were in particular very interesting and intriguing. And so I'll share with you those responses hopefully in a later video very soon. But in the meantime, I would like to ask you yet another question, if you don't mind. And I'm sorry for all these questions that I'm asking, but the more I ask, the more I become even more interested in what it is you have to say. And so the question this time is this, and please feel free to leave your comments or responses in the comments section below. What are your favorite uses of music in cinema? What are your favorite uses of music in cinema? What are your favorite musical scores, musical songs, uses of music in cinema? This can be interpreted in any way that you want. This can be a musical soundtrack. This can be a song that is used in the film itself. This can be a use of, let's say, ambient sound that could be considered to be a form of music. This could be the use of music and then the use of silence or something to that effect. And I think the scope of interpretation of this question is potentially very wide, and so I'd like to leave it up to you to interpret as you like the meaning of the question. Again, what is your favorite use of music in cinema, or what are examples of your favorite uses of music in cinema? And again, this can mean many things. Also, you can mention TV series as well. I say the word cinema, but I try to make that as broad as possible. And so you can really interpret it any which way you like. So I think about these, well, I thought about this particular question in the context of my own possible answer, and I must admit it's a little bit difficult because there are so many great examples of music in films that I encountered during the course of my own film journey that I really cling to. I remember the first time that I saw, for instance, A Hard Day's Night when I was a kid. And I was just beginning to get into the world of the Beatles, for instance, and that was a real eye-opener. And everything about that, from the opening numbers to all the numbers, in fact, I thought were just so great to watch again when I was very young. But that wasn't the only thing, of course. I mean, I am also a big fan, as some of you may know, of the works directed by Dario Argento. And so many of his films are very famous for his collaborations with Goblin. And so in particular, the score for Suspiria, Dario Argento's Suspiria, is, for my money, one of the most memorable soundtracks that I've ever come across. And I'm not the only one, of course, who shares that opinion. It is a highly renowned soundtrack, and I think it adds so much to the actual visual style itself, which is itself very overpowering. So you have an overpowering visual style combined with an overpowering musical style, and you have those two combining, and it'll just really make the whole world into something completely new and unbelievable. And so the Suspiria soundtrack was something that caught on to me early on. I mentioned the film, one of the films that I talked about very recently in a recent live stream was the film Once Upon a Time in the West. And the Ennio Morricone soundtrack is one of those great, great iconic soundtracks, not only in any Leone film, not only in any Western film, but in any film period. And so I'm just utterly amazed, and recently revisiting that film again for purposes of the live stream really cemented home for me just how much I truly love that particular soundtrack. And then there are other soundtracks that I really enjoy and appreciate in terms of the whole musical palette that is expressed there. I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. I'm a big fan of the music of Philip Glass, and his scores for many of his films I think are quite impressive. I was always very impressed, though, by his score for the film Mishima, A Life in Four Chapters, and I still am. I actually have that. I bought the CD of that many, many years ago, and actually still have that same CD. It's sort of broken up, the cases anyway, and the booklet is a little bit torn up a bit, and the CD itself is scratched after having played it countless times ever since I was young. But that is a score that I still listen to rather frequently, even today, and so I'm just very much taken with that. I mean, I mentioned I listen to it frequently, but I listen to it more than frequently. In fact, I still listen to it rather constantly, and it always gives me a real sense of there's a sense of calm, almost serene quality to it on the one hand, and there's a real driving force of urgency, let me put it that way, on the other hand. And so that gives me a real sense of a huge, wide-ranging musical palette, I think. And it's one of my favorite works by Philip Glass, and not just musical movie works, but just works in general. I tend to gravitate more towards the early period of Philip Glass's output, up through the early to mid 80s, and so that falls into that around the mid 80s point in time anyway. And so I'm really drawn by that. And also I'm talking now about the works of John Carpenter. I just finished talking about vampires, and soon I'll be talking about his final works up to now. But he, of course, has a great output of films, and many of his films have such a wonderful soundtrack, as films like Escape from New York or Escape from L.A., Big Trouble in Little China come to mind. Halloween, of course, is one of the most iconic soundtracks that ever was. And so, people who don't necessarily know horror movies still know the theme to Halloween. I mean, it's that famous, obviously. So, so there's John Carpenter stuff, as well as also I'm also a big fan of Bernard Herrmann's works. I again spoke fairly recently about the film Vertigo. And one of the most powerful aspects of that film is the soundtrack. And I was able to speak a little bit in that live stream about particular details of the soundtrack and how it fits in my view anyway, how it fits in thematically and emotionally to the action of the film itself. But it's its own living, breathing entity, in the sense that it really has a life of its own, and it's breathtaking. I still say that there's the soundtrack, and my favorite track of all the tracks, which I think are so lovely, but my favorite track still has to be the track which I think is called By the Fireside, if anyone is interested. That still is such the way that the strings are very rough sounding, almost desperately melancholic, I would say, but it's just a wonderful track of many tracks that are really beautiful on that soundtrack. And Bernard Herrmann, I also should mention that I'm also a big fan of his works, but I'm also quite fond of his later film output. He's very famous, of course. Taxi Driver comes to mind, but I think one of my favorite later tracks or soundtracks by Bernard or scores by Bernard Herrmann is the work that he did for Brian De Palma's film Obsession. I don't know if you know this film. I haven't spoken about Brian De Palma too much on this channel, but I'm actually a great admirer of the film Obsession, and I love that soundtrack very much. I think that's one of those really mesmerizing soundtracks that it represents in musical fashion what the film is a kind of dizzying turn of events and narrative twists. It's a real twisty film, and I think the score is also a very twisty film. It just goes all over the place, and its palette is fresh and vibrant and wonderful. So Obsession, the Brian De Palma film's musical score is really breathtaking, and it still is to this day. I could also mention musicals as well. I mean, musicals are also, of course, a great use of music. I was just talking with some people in the comment section of some of the videos that I've done. Some people were mentioning films like Rocky Horror Picture Show. There were other musicals that were mentioned, like The Sound of Music. West Side Story, I think, was mentioned. I've talked somewhat about the film Bugsy Malone. I don't know if anyone has mentioned Bugsy Malone directly to me yet, but I'm a great fan of that film. I grew up on that film, Bugsy Malone, and even now I still listen to some of those songs. I really love the song Ordinary Fool. I think that's really tender and poignant. Even now, I listen to it years later, and it's great, So there's musicals, and musicals also, of course, affect us all. And so, if you think that there are some great musicals that you want to mention, by all means, please do so. Let me just end this by just mentioning one other film that I think is also very personal and poignant to me, and it's the film called The Sting. And I haven't spoken about The Sting on this channel at all, but it's a film that actually means very much to me, because it was a film that, I've mentioned my mother on this channel before, not too often, but just once in a while. And I've mentioned my father as well. I grew up, and I was an only child, and my parents were very caring, and they were very open and warm people. And so they were, of course, very encouraging in terms of movies and the arts, etc. So I'm very grateful to what it is that they really provided to me in terms of an upbringing and a safe environment, as well as their parenting, of course, and the family, and everything about it, of course. I can't even begin to mention enough how much I owe to them, and I have many memories that I've spoken about a little bit associated with my parents, but I want to mention, if we're talking about music, the film The Sting. And as some of you may know, who knows the film The Sting, you'll know that the musical score is relying on the piano works of Scott Joplin. And Scott Joplin's piano works, there are many famous piano works, The Entertainer, Maple Leaf Rag, and one piece in particular that is used very effectively in the film is called Solace. And I just remember my mother, when she was alive, she could play the piano, and she was a really great pianist. And she played Scott Joplin music almost every day on the piano that we had in the house when I was a kid growing up. And so she would just play it, and I remember these memories of listening to like The Entertainer play throughout the house. And I remember when I was a kid, it's still a little bit hazy and foggy now because it's many years after the fact, but when I was a little kid, and maybe I was sitting next to her on the piano, next to her by the piano, and saying, what is this? And she said, oh, it's The Entertainer, it's The Entertainer. I said, oh, what's that? Because I didn't know at the time, I was still a little kid. And she was trying to explain it to me, but she couldn't. And then I think in that time, there was the Sting on VHS or something, and so we were able to rent it or something. And she showed me not the entire film, because I don't think the film was necessarily appropriate for me at that age, but I do remember her showing me the opening credits and the way that the music played over the opening credits, and I thought that was really great. And I think she may have fast forwarded to the particular scene where the music of Joplin's work Solace was used, and so I was and she would play that tune constantly in the house, and so even now I have a really I have a warm memory that I still cherish with respect to Scott Joplin, and in particular the work Solace and how it's used in the film The Sting. And so I have such that film has such an important place in my memory and in my heart by virtue of the fact that my mother loved the music so. And it really gives me great pleasure to think back on those times and think of how that music was used in the film, and how she obviously loved the music. She had loved the music before, of course, but she really, really loved the music, and especially how it really brought Scott Joplin back. It really made him popular, and it just it created so many warm memories, and even now I can remember and recall with great affection as a little kid, and I'm in some part of the house, and I can hear in the other end of the house my mother playing on the piano Scott Joplin's Solace. So The Sting, that's another example of a film that I think I'm really fond of in terms of the use of music. So, but where was I? Oh yes. So in any event, my friends, the question that I pose again is, what are your favorite uses of music in cinema? So once again, you can interpret this as in any way you want. You can mention TV shows as well. Maybe of course, TV shows, I should have mentioned, I'm a big fan of Twin Peaks as well. And there are many aspects of Twin Peaks in the music, which is very vital and very fundamental to that work as a whole. And there are many aspects to Twin Peaks, TV show aspect, the return, the film, etc. I'm a particular fan of a particular number sung by Jimmy Scott, and also thanks to The Return, I saw all these great bands that, of course, as you know, are featured in a certain aspect of that particular great series, The Return. I must say, for example, that I think like many people, I fell in love with Au revoir, Simone. And so I'm very grateful for that. So my point is that you can interpret the question in any way that you like. Cinema can mean also TV series. Uses of music can mean musical score, or can be a musical or a song, or a particular sound, or use of ambient sound or silence, or anything of that sort that you feel is the way that you want to answer the question, which is, once again, what are your favorite uses of music in cinema? Please feel free to leave your comments in the comment section below. As always, I would love to hear what it is you have to say. And with that, my friends, let me leave you. And until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great films. So thank you very much for your time once again, and cheers.